My name is Phillip Carter. I'm a 2004 graduate of UCLA Law School and a former Army captain, and I practice law with McKenna, Long, and Aldridge in downtown Los Angeles. Yesterday, General David Petraeus testified to the House Armed Services Committee and the House Foreign Relations Committee about progress in Iraq. And he talked about the way that security is progressing in the country, but that political progress is not happening. And this reminds me of an old anecdote that's very popular among Army officers, and it goes back to 1975, when then Colonel Harry Summers was part of the U.S. delegation to Paris negotiating the end of the Vietnam War. He met with a North Vietnamese colonel, a man named Colonel Tu, who was an old soldier who had fought against the United States in that war. And Colonel Summers sort of pointedly told Colonel Tu, "You know, sir, the American troops never lost a battle in the Vietnam War." And Colonel Tu replied, "Yes, that is true, but it is also irrelevant." And the same is true today of the security progress that we're making in Iraq. Security is just one component, albeit an important one, of a successful counterinsurgency program. But it is the political progress which consummates the gains made by security and which consolidates them and preserves them for future prosperity. We may have made some short-term tactical successes in Baghdad and elsewhere, but so far we have not made any of the political progress that we need to sustain and consolidate the surge in U.S. operations in Iraq. The problem is, as General Petraeus said yesterday, that in April 2008, the forces the U.S. has in Iraq will run out of time. They will have literally been in Iraq 15 months or longer, and they will need to come home. And at that point, we will have to ask ourselves, what next? We will have run out of U.S. military troops to provide the short-term security necessary. We may not have achieved the long-term political gains necessary, and according to a commission report released last week, we will probably not have the Iraqi security forces, the army and the police, that are necessary to provide short-term security after U.S. troops depart. I served in Iraq from 2005 to 2006 as an advisor to the Iraqi police, so this is a problem that I'm very familiar with. I worked closely with the police in Baquba, a small city approximately 40 miles northeast of Baghdad, and we were responsible for the police throughout the Diyala Province. The Diyala Province is a diverse mix of Sunnis, Shiites, and Kurds, which stretches all the way from Baghdad, north to Kurdistan, and east out to the Iranian border. In our work advising the Iraqi police, we saw them make some short-term progress. They became a little bit better at doing their job. They got some more trucks, some more weapons, some more personnel. But they were never quite capable of providing the long-term lasting security, the rule of law, the law and order, if you will, that the police need to provide for the country. And so as U.S. troops dropped, as troops came home from the Diyala Province, security worsened a great deal. Even though we were standing them up, to use the president's term, and we were standing down, security was getting worse. Why? Well, it really broke down into a few things. One was corruption. During my time there, I saw Iraqi police officers who stole fuel, stole uniforms, stole weapons, even stole trucks. And they would do so because they felt they had to get something out of their job, that they were entitled to take these things because they were a police colonel or a police general, that these were sort of the spoils of their job. The problem was that this left the Iraqi police unable to do its job, and the people of the Diyala province suffered. The second big problem was sectarian influence. The police force is largely headed by Shiites, and not just average Shiites, not the ones that get along with Sunnis and intermarry with them, but very sort of hardcore Shiite leaders from Iraqi's Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution and from organizations associated with Muqtada al-Sadr. These Shiite leaders were extremely oriented on sectarian agendas. They pursued Sunni leaders with the full force of the police force. They did so in a way which undermined the ethnic bridges between these communities, and they did so in a way which undermined security. We knew, for example, that some police units were running death squads when they were off duty. We also knew that some Shiite-led police departments were arresting Sunnis and throwing them into prison with no charges whatsoever. This does not lead to long-term security. Third, we saw that the Iraqi forces just had a long way to go. It takes years and decades to train the mid-level and senior-level management of a police force or an army, to teach them the kinds of lessons they learn on the job, to give them the tools they need to do their work. You can't just send someone through a 10-week academy and expect that they'll come out ready to be a police sergeant or a police lieutenant. At best, they could probably work the street, but it takes much longer to develop the long-term experience and that reservoir of knowledge necessary to run a modern security force. The other thing is that the Iraqi police force really reflected Iraqi society. At the time I was there in 2005 and 2006, there was a 50% literacy rate in Iraq. Well, you can imagine that police need to be able to read the law to enforce the law. But the recruits that we were getting onto the police force could do neither. And so we actually wound up having to teach these recruits how to read before we could even teach them how to read the law and then how to enforce the law. And this made our job much tougher. All of these long-term challenges made it very difficult to build the Iraqi police force. But we probably could have done it if we had the right resources from the U.S. government. Unfortunately, we didn't have those either. We had 2 small teams of advisors tasked to train a police department of 9,000 people. We had a few civilian police officers from the states that were provided by contract from the State Department, but these too were not enough. We had no federal prosecutors, we had no people trained in the management of police departments. We simply had to make do with what we had, and these resources were not enough. To this day, we are still not devoting the level of resources necessary to train the Iraqi police force, the Iraqi army, or the other institutions of Iraqi civil society at the provincial level. The government, the courts, the jails, the marketplaces, all of those things which bind together Iraqi society. And so, in April 2008, when the surge runs out, I have grave concerns about the ability of Iraqi society to continue and to provide any sort of security for the people of Iraq. So what can we do? Well, at this point, we don't have a lot of options. The time is late, and we have to move quickly. We have to develop a new and stronger advisory effort for the Iraqi army and the Iraqi police. We have to put our best and brightest officers into these jobs. We have to give them the resources they need, and we have to do a much better job of working with the Iraqi Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Defense to make the leadership of these agencies better. It's not enough to simply train the police on the ground or to train the soldiers on the ground, because if you do so, then you're merely handing a sharp knife to a leader in the Iraqi Ministry of the Interior to do what he or she wants to do with it. You have to also train the ministers to do the right thing when it comes to using the police, not to use them as death squads, not to use them for sectarian agendas, but to use them for the right missions. We haven't done any of this so far, but the problem is we don't have time not to do it anymore. The surge will run out in April 2008, and if we don't start working on the Iraqi security forces now, it will be too late. And then we will be left with a much worse situation next spring when General Petraeus comes back to Congress.